Hey friends, glad to be back today. And today I really want to talk about healthy marriage. The 10 concepts that make up a healthy marriage. I talked about it in a recent video on YouTube, and I want to go more in depth right here. You know, one of the things that I think about marriage is that we see marriage. We see it on TV, we see it in films, we see marriage portrayed in reality shows, right? And we also remember the way that we were raised by our mother, father, or whatever family dynamic that was in the household. And so we have a lot of thoughts about what marriage is, what it should be, what it can't be. But let's really talk about what a healthy marriage truly is, because I think sometimes we don't really ever see a healthy marriage. We see different concepts of perhaps okay, some concepts of very unhealthy marriages, but we really want to talk about what makes for a healthy marriage and really dig into that right now in this video. So let's begin with the concept of respect. You know, when I was talking about the video on YouTube about the healthy marriage, I did talk about respecting the fact that we have to have respect for ourselves, and then we have to have respect for the other person. But I want to go a little deep here because I think that a lot of times we don't realize what that truly means, right? So when we have respect in a marriage, the only way that we can get that respect is by respecting ourselves. Okay, so for example, if I walk into a marriage and I don't have self-respect, right? If I don't have it, it doesn't exist for me, I can't respect my spouse because I don't even understand how to respect myself, if that makes sense. And so let's dig even deeper into self-respect. What does that mean? So to me, self-respect is about, you know, creating those boundaries of things that we will accept in our life and things we won't accept. It's about really watching where we place our time and our energy. It's about who we spend our time with. It's what we will allow ourselves to be exposed to. Okay? And I think that's really important when we think about respect. And so when I started gaining more and more self-respect for myself, especially when I took that year hiatus off, and I've talked about that before, took that year off, I got to know myself, I stopped dating, stopped having sex, and I'm not recommending that everybody's got to do this because some of y'all are in a marriage right now and you're trying to save the marriage, you're trying to work on the marriage. But if you are single right now or you just came out of a relationship, this is something that you really want to think about. Because what I realized is that I didn't really respect myself because I was in relationships that weren't healthy. I was spending time with people that I really didn't need to spend time with. I was interacting in activities that were wasting my time, wasting my life. And if I really did respect myself, I wouldn't put myself in the situation. I mean, it's just quite easy. It's interesting now that I look back, you know, you look back 20 years and you look at what you spent time doing. And now it's interesting how I will delegate a certain amount of time in my schedule to have any sort of social activity if I do, but that activity has to be in a positive light. It has to be healthy. It has to warrant a good feeling toward me, but on top of that, it has to progress or move my life forward in some way. And so what I'm saying when it comes into the marriage quotient is that when we actually understand self-respect, we put ourselves in a relationship that's healthy, it's honest, it's authentic, okay? But it's also kind of the preamble concept of I see my value and therefore I can see your value. And so what I found is that until we see our personal value, our own value, the problem is that we put ourselves in the wrong relationships. Now, if you're in a relationship right now where you see your value but your spouse doesn't see their value, this becomes a problem. Because this is the thing that I really didn't talk about at all on the video on YouTube, is that when your spouse does not realize who they are, okay, so they're probably extremely codependent in the relationship. They don't feel like they have an identity in the relationship. They feel overwhelmed. Maybe they're dealing even with some depression because of this. This is something that you really need to think about because one, you did walk into a marriage and go into a relationship with someone that obviously doesn't accept themselves, doesn't have personal respect for themselves. And so that's something that we kind of want to think about as well. But one of the things that I want you to begin to work on, if that's the case, is really sitting down with your spouse and kind of explaining the concepts of boundaries with them. And I think not in the concept of maybe the marriage per se, but the concept of the interactions with their personal friends, the concepts with their work boundaries, because I think that when someone doesn't really have self-respect for themselves, they don't have any boundaries. They'll do whatever's necessary to be liked to deal with the situation, but I think that we need to really focus on that to understand the situation. And a lot of times too, in a marriage, remember, we can't tell our spouse what we want them to do. We can't tell them what to do. They're not children, okay? And so we have to formulate these conversations and communications in a positive way, in a positive style. And I think that when we actually execute the communication, meaning we start the opening lines of the communication, we can't go like gangbusters and like cover the whole concept of respect and just beat it into their head. Actually, what we want to do is we want to say, we want to point out the things that we see that maybe they can rectify on their own. Okay, and so sitting down with your spouse, and also remembering when you're sitting down with your spouse, remember they are supposed to be a good friend of yours. And so how would you talk to a good friend of yours in this situation? It's not about talking down to them. It's not about being authoritative. It's actually about being a friend and saying, hey, I care about you a lot. I want the best for you. These are some of the things that I've seen that I think need to be maybe looked at by you, but also maybe thinking about how this impacts how you feel about yourself and your self-worth. One of the things that I found is that even if you feel like you and your spouse are on different playing grounds, as far as one person might be more awakened or more connected as far as with their value, that's okay. But the way that we can actually come together and work together in this relationship is communication. Okay, without communication and without explaining to them how much you care, we're not going to get very far with this. Because remember, the sad thing about it is you can be a genius in your own right, but because you're married to somebody, they might not take your opinion, they might not take your advice, right? Because a lot of times in that situation, people get defensive. Okay, we get defensive because we feel like we're being talked down to. We feel as though you're telling us what we have to do, or that we're not good enough to figure it out, or we're not aware, and that's just not the case. And so I think that the beginning of the communication is with the cooperation as well. So like when I was talking about the video on YouTube about cooperation instead of competition, in order to really have communication in your marriage, you've got to get rid of and wipe out competition completely. Okay, there is no competition. Because remember, this is supposed to be a safe haven. This is supposed to be the place that you go to after a long day at work. This is supposed to be a place that you go to, that you go on vacation and you have fun. This is the place, if you choose to raise children, that you're raising children in this safe, happy, healthy environment. And when we're competitive in nature, that's just not aiding and abetting in a good quality of marriage life. Okay, and so one of the biggest things too is that cooperation versus competition, when we are in a competitive nature, that means that we have allowed ego to walk in the door, and ego is running the marriage. Okay, and we can't have ego and also have mutual respect. It's just not there. Okay, we just can't have it. And so one of the ways that we can actually open the lines of communication is to really be aware of, on a personal level, how often is my ego involved in the communication with my spouse? How often is my ego saying, hey, I was right, or see, I told you so, or I told you should do it this way, or I told you it was not going to happen, or I told you you're going to have that argument with your boss. That's all egotistical comments, right? And so if we really want to create a cooperative environment where both people can grow healthy and happy in this relationship, we've got to make sure that we're edging the ego out. Okay, because ego's not going to help us in any of this. And that's one of the biggest deals, like when I was talking about the concept of the know-it-all mentality. Again, the know-it-all mentality comes from this egotistical kind of side of view. It also comes from a concept of a narcissistic side view, but it's also based on the fact that this person has to portray themselves as the know-it-all because of what lies underneath it, okay? And so it's a like the narcissistic mask, right? The person that is the most narcissistic is normally the most vulnerable, the most feared, the more scared individual, and so they've used this as a protection tactic. And so the know-it-all concept has got to be left at the door as well, because again, that's another egotistical side that's not going to help for mutual respect, and it's not going to allow for cooperation. One of the biggest caveats, though, that I want to continue to talk about is the fact that we want to think about this as, even if there's a bad argument, and I use bad in quotes, okay? Even if there's not a really positive argument that's taking place in the family dynamic, the only way that we can really understand that and take care of it is to actually see our spouse as a friend. And I know that it's hard sometimes to see that, but I want you to think about it, because we want to always do the right thing. We want to put the right foot forward. We want to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I did the right thing, and I was there, and I was there for my spouse, and I had communication, and I treated them like I would a good friend. Okay, because that way there's no guilt, there's no shame, and there's no regret on our end of the playing field. Because remember, even if the marriage is a little bit rocky, and even if there are issues, and even if there's a situation that you don't think that you can overcome, even if you feel like you're going to get a divorce, the concept of doing the right thing and showing mutual respect is key, okay? Because they are a human being as well. And so really, really think about that. I also want you to think about if there is something that's insurmountable right now in the marriage. Like, let's say like somebody has stepped out of the marriage, and they've apologized for it. They've gotten real with it. They've explained, they've been transparent, and it's really hard to accept that. I want you to, if you're the person that was cheated on and you're feeling jilted at this time, that's the kind of time that you need to really communicate with yourself and look at yourself and say, what is it that I need from this person to do right by me? But better yet, one of the things is that I agree that somebody stepping out of the marriage, that's not a positive thing. And I agree that they were wrong in that situation. But what I found is a lot of times people will run from the marriage based on this. And they'll run and they'll get into another relationship, and we'll see it pop up again. And I'm not saying that when somebody gets cheated on that's part of their issue, because sometimes some people are more predestined to do that. Sometimes there are people out there that quite honestly have done this a lot in their life, and so it's something that they're accustomed to. But sometimes it could be that somebody feels like they're not loved, they're not supported, they're looking for acceptance. And so to really have that communication, yes, was it the right thing to do? No. But I think by communicating and really thinking about this stuff, I don't feel like running away from the issues is ever a thing. It's just like, it's like moving out of a state, right? It's like, I got to move because the state's not working for me. That's probably not going to work for you as well. So I really want you to think about that before wanting to get a divorce, to realize that all relationships are going to have their ups and downs. All relationships are going to have issues, okay? Marriage is something that we have to work through. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be pitfalls. There's going to be a lot of things that we have to overcome. But in order to overcome that, we have to be steady friends and communicate. Because once we stop that communication, we really don't have anything. Okay, and so if you are in a troubled situation like that, and I want to do more videos directed to those situations, if you are in a situation like that, that is very difficult for you to put that on the side, to accept that, to forgive it and let it go, I want to do some videos on that, because that is tough. It's a challenging situation to be in. But what I found is, even if you don't stay in the marriage, we still got to come to some sort of agreement, and we have to come to some sort of successful acceptance and forgiveness. Because when we hold on to that anger, the only person that anger hurts is ourselves. Okay, and I'll tell you one more thing. If we don't get right with the marriage and we don't show each other mutual respect and actually have that communication, there's going to be a lot of regret, because there's going to be a lot of things left unsaid. And what I've seen oftentimes, more often than not, is that people will leave a marriage, go through the divorce proceedings, meet somebody else, and have some of the same similar problems again in a different marriage. Okay, and so what happens is we never really had the communication in the first one. Even if we weren't able to really patch things up, it's still getting the communication out there and understanding that marriage is a two-way street. Was there something that I did to predicate that? What was that person doing? And understanding where the two come into play. And so really thinking about that is ultimately important. You know, one of the last things that I really want to hit on in this video, that I think it's very interesting and it's very dynamic, is the fact that we do have to have that unconditional self-love. We do have to have that unconditional self-love, because that unconditional self-love has to be predicated and has to be in the beginning of the relationship for both individuals. Okay, and if you're still teetering on that, that's okay. But I want you to realize that the problems that come from not having that unconditional self-love is we have a choice sometimes of competing instead of cooperating. One of the biggest things too is that we have this codependence. We don't have our own identity. But just like stepping outside of the marriage, when somebody's stepping outside of the marriage, right? If somebody's putting themselves in situations like going out with their friends and getting drinks and going out late and kind of not putting the marriage first, coming home late, not taking care of their responsibilities. This goes back to self-love because this shows that this person is needing this attention, they're needing this acceptance. They still haven't found what they're looking for, and a little bit of this is escape. Right? So we're escaping the situation. We're trying to avoid the issues that we have to deal with. We're trying to avoid the reality of the situation. So I think that this is a big deal. And when you're really thinking about self-love, that is all predicated on self-acceptance. Okay, and so this is something that maybe you can work on with your spouse, sitting down and having that conversation. What are the things that we value? What are the things that you value? What are your beliefs? And you doing the same thing and kind of mocking up or writing that up and really thinking about how both of your lives do mesh in a good way. They're not e-mesh, but they mesh in a good way. But at the same time, both of you stand for some separate things as well. And also having those healthy boundaries in a relationship. And that's a really positive thing, as well as really working on yourself. One of the things that I found that a healthy marriage, one of the best habits, is that each individual continues to work on themselves. They continue to create things in their life that they love. They continue to do the things they love, even if their spouse is not into it. It's not a big deal. Okay, so it's having their own personal life, having that own acceptance, and actually working on the things that matter, and taking that time to be physically healthy as well. Okay, and so that's a big deal too. And another thing that I found that really bonds really healthy marriages is doing healthy things together. So whether it's working out together at the gym or going and painting, going to a painting class together or doing something like that, or kung fu or whatever it is that you want to do, but doing stuff that's healthy and based on healthy values, because everybody could go out and drink, everybody could go out and party, but it's doing those things that are effective, that actually use the different senses. They help you physically, they help you emotionally. Maybe it's going to a reading, like actually reading a book together and having, a book reading class, or perhaps going sailing or doing something that is creative and fun. But also you come together in a more of a calming way as well, and you can actually experience things together. And I think, healthy couples experience things together. Okay, healthy couples is not all about dining out and eating and spending a lot of money on food and wine. It's about the experience in life, right? It's about taking the walk with the dog, right? It's about taking that trip. It's about any of those types of things that encourage you to be able to have communication from it, that encourages you to have new experiences from it. And that's what allows a healthy relationship to grow together, even if there are some times of bumpiness that we have to go through. So I hope this video has helped you. I will create more videos about marriage as well, but I think that a lot of these concepts, well, actually all of these concepts directly relate to any relationship. Respect, cooperation over competition, the whole idea of being, cooperation over codependency, but having that self-love. All of those things are integrated in any kind of relationship because they're the basis of having a healthy relationship. Because without that, we're going in it not being a full person, right? And we're looking for that other person for us to identify ourselves with, which doesn't help us because we have our own identity. Someone else outside of us cannot identify us and cannot help us to determine who we are. They can add to our quality of life, but they can't be our identity. It's just like looking for purpose outside of self. That's unrealistic and it doesn't happen. So again, thinking about what makes for a healthy relationship, the bedrock of a healthy relationship is being you, a healthy you. Look forward to the next video, and in the meantime, I look forward to hearing some of your feedback on some content that you would like me to produce, some content that's important for you, and I will put that at the top of the list of video production work here at Live Your True Life Productions. So let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and don't forget to live your true life.